just a minute behind what you see there on the screen. Okay, we're live. Take it away.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Bailey Ridge Park Master Plan virtual public meeting, the first of 3 public meetings with the neighborhood. And my name is Tony Whitler. I am a parks planner with the City of Salem and project manager for the Bailey Ridge Park Master Plan. And with me this evening from the city is Patricia Farrell, Parks and Natural Resources Planning Manager. And also joining us are our consultants, Cameron McCarthy, Landscape Architecture and Planning, Colin MacArthur, Principal Planner, raising his hand there, and Liz Avil, Landscape Architect, Project Manager, and Victor Garcia, Designer. And Victor will also be monitoring our chat for us tonight. Thank you, Victor. And we also have Mitch Jones, our IT guru. I'm shouting out to him. He's helping us make this Zoom meeting run very smoothly. Okay, we'll get started. Just a little brief background about the master plan process. Our comprehensive park system master plan, adopted or updated in 2013, is our overarching planning document. It is our guiding document and policies for all parks within Salem and the recreation component within. And I'm going to touch on a couple of the main items that it guides us in for our meeting tonight. It defines our park classifications and the service areas. So, for instance, our urban parks, such as Riverfront Park, that serves a region-wide service area beyond the city limits for concerts and marathons and those kinds of events. And then we have community parks that serve within the city of Salem. They have a 3-mile service area, and those typically have our tournament ball fields and draw a large crowd. And then we have our neighborhood parks, such as Bailey Ridge, and that serves just the local neighborhood, a 1/2-mile service area. Excuse me. Oh, you can go back up, Liz, that's okay. And so that the plan also defines uses based on those classifications. So for instance, our urban, you're not going to find at Bailey Ridge at a neighborhood park features that would be in an urban and community park, because what we don't want to do is we don't want to bring 100 cars into your neighborhood. So we have certain standard and optional features that are outlined in the comprehensive plan that work for neighborhood park use. And we'll go into that a little more as we go through the presentation, and also at our next meeting too as well. But a neighborhood park, a master plan, is a high-level plan. I call it a 30,000-foot level plan. We form that plan through our neighborhood visioning process, what we're having tonight, and we'll have in the next several meetings. And we get your input on what you'd like to see at the park, how you'd like to use it, how you'd like it to look and feel. And we take that information, we form a draft plan, then we take it to the Southwest Association of Neighbors. We ask them to endorse that plan. And then from there, it goes to our Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. We ask them to endorse that plan and make a recommendation to City Council, where it then goes to be approved. And then once it's approved, we have an approved plan that we can use then as we move into development. But where it's really important for us as well is if we go to seek grant funding. So we go to Oregon Parks and Rec and we look for funding to build the park. They want to see a master plan. They want to know that we've been to the neighborhood, that we've had discussions on what you want in that park, and they want to know what's going in the park because they want to know what they're paying for, right? So the park master plan really does serve service at various levels, and then what happens then is if you look at that plan and you see a little circle that says this is the playground, for instance, when we get to the actual, what I call boots on the ground process, when we get to design drawings, that's more detailed. So it might change slightly. Your playground might shift a little northwest, south, east, depending on how those plans lay out. But the high level plan identifies what uses will go in based on your input and how it'll be used. The other thing I wanted to note as we go through this process is talking about what the comprehensive park system plan identifies as standard and optional features. As we touch on those tonight, we also consider will they be compatible with the topography and the natural resources on the site. And Bailey Ridge, as you know, has wonderful natural resources and some steep slopes. It's a beautiful park. So we keep these things in mind as we talk about the features for the park. And you can move to the next slide. So briefly, this is the service area. I talked about a half-mile service area for neighborhood parks. You can see Bailey Ridge outlined in yellow here. The red line is the urban growth boundary. And if you can see, I hope, the black and orange dashed line, that's the city limits. And then the purple shaded area is the service area. I went a little beyond the city limits because, you know, this neighborhood is unique. It's very encapsulated with all the rural area and the golf course and then Minnow Brown to the east. So I just included all the residents here within this area because you'll all be walking and biking to the park and be providing input. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cameron McCarthy to take over the presentation, and I'll see you in the question and answer period.
Great. Thank you, Tony. I'm Liz. I just wanted to thank everybody again for coming. And Colin and I are going to walk through the presentation together. We're going to start by talking about existing conditions. This is one of the first steps in the process, and there are a number of existing landscapes in the park right now. The first that I'll mention is this fairly dense Douglas fir forest in the northeast corner of the site. Then there's also on the western section of the site an upland and a wetland. And the upland's divided by the Chambers Swale pretty dramatically. And then in the lower southwest section of the site, there's also some Scotch pine trees that are currently there. And Colin, do you want to elaborate on any?
Yeah. Thank you, Liz. Again, I'm Colin, and our existing conditions were supported or formed by a walkthrough we did on the site with City of Salem staff a few months ago. And as Tony noted, the site does have significant slopes. It slopes predominantly from the northwest to the southeast. As you can see, if you can see those little lines that run across the screen, those are contour lines, and they all go essentially one direction towards the street, excuse me. So there is quite a bit of slope across the site down to Tayside Street. We walked up the slope to the north west corner and observed some viewpoints up there, some view corridors that were strong once you get above the street level, and outside of the tree line there are some great views to the south and southeast, southwest. Walking along that corridor, we did observe some erosion that is occurring along Chambers Swale. The swale, or the stream channel itself, is incised, and portions of the bank are eroding. So we do think there is some opportunity. We'll talk about more to do some stream channel restoration along Chambers Swale. And then near the top of the swale to the north, we observe sort of some great large old Oregon white oak trees that we do think are a great feature on the site to be preserved and protected. Liz, do you want to move to the next slide?
Let's go forward. All right. So thanks, Colin. We also analyzed, after we digested the existing conditions and visited the site, we started to analyze where there are opportunities based on the existing conditions and where there are constraints or more limiting factors. This just helps us as we move forward, understand kind of the parameters we're working in. And for this graphic that you're looking at, we organized all the opportunities and constraints that we found within kind of 6 different areas on site. And we'll go through each one and kind of talk about that. The first one I'll mention is the Douglas Fir Woodland up in the northeast corner. It's labeled as number 1, and it's really dense currently. However, we see that there's an opportunity to do some thinning in that woodland and address some of the tree health, and by doing that, provide some space for new amenities potentially. And as Colin mentioned, there's slope throughout the site, but there is also slope in this area, so that would be one constraint. The second area we'll talk about is the entrance near where Tayside and Rogue come together. It's a small entrance right now, but we see there's an opportunity for signage here and potentially a little bit more park access at that point, and possibly some play amenities. And the third area we'll look at is the Scotch pine trees down in the southwest corner. There are existing trees, like we mentioned, but we also see there's potential just to expand the access to the park at that lower section. And then potential amenities could be play or a small kind of modest picnicking area. And then I'm going to let Colin walk through areas 4 through 6.
Thank you, Liz. Area 4 we defined as the wetland and upland area that is to the north and to the west of Chambers Swale. And it's mostly uniform sloping area that doesn't have a lot of vegetation except for some small trees. We think there is an opportunity for a trail connection through this area, maybe some benches and seating that take advantage of the viewpoints, and then restoration plantings within and around the wetland and along the swale. The wetland is a constraint and also a natural feature, something to be preserved and to be protected, but also something that is in need of some restoration. Doesn't have a lot of your typical wetland vegetation as it is now. That is the area shown in blue. Area 5 we delineated as the Chambers Swale area itself and the riparian corridor adjacent to it. We think somewhere along here there is an opportunity for a connection to the whatever is the future trail system, maybe a bridge crossing across the swale, moving from east to west. And then, as I mentioned in our site analysis, I think there's a strong opportunity for revegetation, stream channel restoration, and improving the overall health of the channel and the swale itself. And like the wetland, that is a natural feature that we'll need to work around and do our best to enhance and improve through this process. And then finally, we identified area 6, which is to the north, as a connection opportunity there is an existing access that extends from Illahee Court Street that is paved, that essentially dead ends at the park boundary. We think there's an opportunity to extend this through the grove Liz talked about as area 1, to create an accessible path that extends or connects down to Tayside Street and along the street frontage. This would require some opening and thinning of the tree canopy, which is also consistent with some of our opportunities we observed in area 1. I believe that covers 6 areas and the opportunities and constraints within those areas. Liz, I think we can go to the next one unless I missed anything.
No, that's great.
Okay, great. Okay, here are, oh yeah,
Oh,
go ahead. I was just gonna go ahead with the views. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. So we have just a couple of slides with some photos that we took when you did our site visit. And we just wanted to highlight some of the features on the site. So one of the conditions Colin mentioned was just the views on site. And so this top photo, probably like many of you know, looks towards Tayside Street and the neighborhood. And the bottom photo looks towards Chambers Swale, and then the Doug Fir Forest is behind that.
This is some closer up photos of Chambers Swale itself, running through the site, and you can see, I'm sure all of you that have been on the property are familiar with this condition, but you can see how incised it is in locations and how deep the channel is, and some non-native invasive vegetation along its banks and along with signs of erosion. So here we do see an opportunity to work with this important natural feature and drainage corridor, but to make it stronger and more healthy, and to improve its overall ecological function and really make it an asset for the park itself.
Nice, thanks, Colin. And so we did want to share some photos just of that existing connection. It was one of the opportunities Colin mentioned that we'd like to build on this, and it's the north or the access point on the north property line by Illahee Court. And it's just a good opportunity to continue access throughout the park.
These are some shots within and looking towards the Douglas Fir Woodland itself from Tayside Street. And a couple of things we noted walking into it were how dense the trees were next to each other, and on that day it felt very cold and dark within the woodland. So we do think, again, there's an opportunity for more light and through some thinning, which would also improve tree health. There have been some structures we observed informally constructed on the edge of the woodland. And then as you get to the outskirts of the woodland, the overall tree health improves. And you can see an edge looking from a picnic table. It's in good shape and some nice color with deciduous trees. And then along Tayside Street, looking towards it. But again, we think there are opportunities for thinning, introduction of new amenities, and connectivity through the site within the woodland. Oh, and then I'll also mention, often on our projects that involve tree removal or tree thinning, we are able to reuse the wood material on site through the construction of benches or nature play elements or other features. And again, we're very early in the process, but we're hopeful that we can, if trees are removed, we can reuse some of the wood on site for those materials.
Nice. Thanks, Colin. So next, like Tony mentioned in the beginning, we talked about park facilities a little bit. So we have some images to support, just showing like what kind of facilities we typically see in neighborhood parks. So the first slide goes through standard ones. So these would be kind of like your baseline ones you'd see, things like, you know, small, modest picnic areas, site furnishings throughout the park, like benches and bicycle parking or trash receptacles. And we also included some examples of play equipment that you might see at this scale and size of park, just what that could look like. And then walking paths are also really typical amenity that you might find.
Thanks, Liz. So Liz described what would be more common as the typical or traditional neighborhood park facilities. Now we've got a couple of slides that show some of the optional facilities that we might consider as part of a neighborhood park master plan. The first couple are examples of nature playgrounds, and these are areas that use natural materials, stone, wood, other features as play equipment. The second photo is of a nature playground we designed at Rock Ridge Park in Bend that reused juniper trees as climbing logs and a children's playground. So that would be an option. Instead of a traditional playground, we do more of a nature playground. And then neighborhood parks typically have things like picnic shelters, and it may be small picnic shelters, a few small picnic shelters, or a larger picnic shelter in a central location like the one you see in the middle slide. Soft surface paths or trails are very common in neighborhood parks, and we could definitely see something like that around the perimeter of this park and along the swale itself. There is a need for hard surface paths, or at least paths that meet accessibility in certain areas of these parks. And we do see a need for hard surface paths connecting from Tayside to some of the existing and planned accesses, Ilhi and other. So perhaps an extension of hard surface paths along the street or near the street. And then another idea that's been contemplated that we have located in neighborhood parks is not necessarily a disc golf course. A full typical disc golf course is larger than this site would allow, but we oftentimes will install a basket or a few baskets, maybe 3, as a mini practice course that is geared more towards children and people learning the game, to give them something that they can do at the park. So that's just an option that we are considering. I think we have one more optional set, Liz.
Yeah.
Okay. Another facility that is common in neighborhood parks, not all, but some, is a smaller than a half-court basketball court, but a 3-point basketball court that just has one hoop and striping out to the 3-point line with a little bit beyond. It does allow for a half-court pickup game. We might see exercise stations, outdoor exercise stations that allow people to do various pull-ups, sit-ups, other types of exercise activities outdoor. That could be a common, and then more of the very common things we see in neighborhood parks and other open space and natural areas, signage, interpretive or educational signage talking about the features that are there. We talked about the potential for creek restoration or stream restoration along Chambers Swale, paths that could be used for on-leash dog walking. And then we're trying to do more with just plantings than aesthetics, and try to make sure that they provide an ecological function as well. And that's where we're looking at flower plantings that also provide for pollination by our wildlife and bees. So pollinated gardens are a specific element that we are becoming more common as we design these facilities.
Nice, thanks, Colin. So we have one more slide before the Q&A, and just to touch on overall timeline of the project and involvement opportunities. The first meeting is tonight that you all are in right now. And I did want to note that there is a survey online that we'll share a link to in the chat box. But then there'll also be future public meetings noted here in March, March 16th, and then again in April, on April 27th. And there'll be, the content of the meeting will be different as we progress. We'll take your feedback in the survey, and the next time we meet, it'll be more refined version of in the process, a later stage, and we'll be talking in more detail about what's happening in the project. And Colin, did you want to add anything about the timeline?
No, I'll just emphasize that this is our first event in the process. There's a survey out, and this is all about collecting input and hearing from residents and neighbors and people who's interested in the project. And I can see that we've got a good group of participants, and I'm looking forward to hearing what everybody has to say.
Nice. Thanks. So just a couple notes again, as right before we switch into the questions. If you can use the raise hand button to let us know you have a question, that's super helpful, and we can go one person at a time. And we'll try to do one question per person, just so that everyone has a chance to participate before we kind of loop back around for follow-up questions. If you are more comfortable typing, go ahead and type it in the chat, and we will take a look at the chat box questions. We'll take a break and go and look at those too. Let's see. I think I'm going to stop sharing so we can all look at each other. Okay. So just 1 second while I kind of get my screen rearranged.
Mitch, can you, are we at the Q&A now, Liz?
We are, yeah.
So Mitch, can you adjust, make the audio available?
People can now unmute themselves.
Okay.
I have a question.
Okay, let's see. I think, was that Chris?
Yeah, it's Chris Caldwell, Mike Caldwell. We live right across the street from the park, 3830 Tayside Street. And I have several different questions. We've lived here for 12 years since the place was built. And I've noticed the inability of the city to address the maintenance of the current swale, which is on the other side of the street from us in the quote unquote park area. And that has, the erosion has continued to bring sediment down to our property. And the city has been good enough to come in 3 different times and take it out, but it's still a problem and it hasn't been addressed. And I doubt very much if it will be addressed. And even though you may be able to build a park with SDC money, the question that I have is, who's going to maintain that? There doesn't seem to be a good deal of general fund dollars, according to the park planners that was at the Southwest Association meeting here recently. And she said that the maintenance is done by general funds and the development is done by SDCs. So how is it that you plan to develop a park and maintain it, which is a concern? Secondly, I think that there's a parking issue that's going to be created by any development, which we understand that. Frankly, we completely agree that this is a beautiful area and there's a a lot of capability to be addressed here in natural state, but developing a full-fledged major apparatuses and everything else to me seems a little bit far-flung, if you want to know the truth. So we have those questions, and we will be more than happy to understand your answers.
Yes, this is Tony Whitler, park planner with the city. With regard to your question about the swale and for the park property, well, let me address for the neighborhood, the issues with the neighborhood. Tom Glass, the HOA president for the Bailey Ridge Homeowners Association, has been connected to our development services manager, Glenn Davis. And Glenn has reached out to Tom, and they're going to focus on the neighborhood side. Okay, so this meeting here tonight is with regard to the park. Last week, I met with our stormwater manager, and she has brought on a consultant, engineering firm, hydrology, to look at Chambers Swale and then do a hydrology study to identify the reasoning behind the down cutting up at the north end, and then how to address those issues. So that is in process right now. So we do understand the concerns. The neighborhood portion south of the park, that's not part of the park, does need to be addressed separately, and we are working on connecting folks together to address that. With regard to parking, you do have on-street parking, excuse me. I think with the amenities that will probably go into the park, given the natural resources and the topography, like I mentioned earlier, there probably will be just a few amenities that can go in, depending on what everyone wants. But I don't see it as being an issue of a lot of people coming in. Your neighborhood is so secluded. It's really encapsulated within all this rural area. I don't anticipate that being an issue. I don't know that for sure because I can't tell the future, but I'm just, 20 years of being in parks. I think that it should just be used by your immediate neighbors. With regard to maintenance, we don't move forward on park planning and development unless we know for sure that that can be maintained, or, when we acquire parks, our parks operations crew knows that that is another park that they need to budget for. We do have, for undeveloped parks, they don't get that much attention, it's true. They get a couple of times a year, they get rough mowing. And we do rely on the help of our neighbors with regard to these undeveloped parks, being our eyes and ears. And sometimes people volunteer to help with some of the things at the park as far as maintenance. Once a park is developed, a neighborhood park is usually visited once a week. And that's our typical scenario. It is budgeted for maintenance. Yes, it is. The maintenance aspect is funded through general fund, but it is budgeted. So it will be cared for. We would not develop a park and then not have it be maintained.
Well, I appreciate your answer, but like I said, I listened to the Southwest Neighborhood Association meeting the other day when they had their Zoom meeting, and it was clear that there's a park up by Candelaria. Year and a half, they've been waiting for a merry-go-round to get fixed. So to suggest that adding this new apparatuses and et cetera is going to somehow be automatically included with no problems in the general fund maintenance budget, I seem to think that's a little bit of a stretch. Now I could be wrong, and you guys may have more money than I think you do. But when you got 90 police officers, according to this Southwest Association meeting the other night, that said there's 90 police officers short in the city of Salem. We got a mountain coming down on River Road pretty readily over the last decade or two, and it seems to fall in there. But yet you have money to maintain a park, and you can't even maintain what you have now. So I have a lot of questions about that.
I understand your concern. I completely understand. If I was in that neighborhood as well, I would have your same concerns. It's something that we need to consider as we go through our planning process and think about what features go into the park and how well they can be maintained. And when we do put together our construction drawings, they go by our parks operations staff. They have a lot of input on how the features are maintained. We purchase items, which is why it's rather costly, but we purchase items that can last. They have longevity. They can stand the weather. They can stand kids beating up on it. Sometimes there's things you just can't avoid. Things happen and it takes time to get parts in. I understand your frustration. I'm not sure what the situation is in Candelaria with a merry-go-round. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that situation, but it's something that just has to take place, as an issue occurs. So I can't really address that specifically, but it's good to develop, to have a master plan and then develop a park because it brings good positive use into your park. And then it does get on that once a week schedule for mowing and maintenance.
Well, I think you have a great opportunity in front of you because you have a very natural site that could be developed quite nicely for a lot of different folks, a lot of different values. I was encouraged when I heard one of your planners discuss the fact that they could have a natural shelters and outside, apparatuses and those sort of things. And I think that's exactly what this place needs. But I think you have that opportunity, but you have to fix the water. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony. In the interest of time, I want to make sure that we can at least try to get to everybody's questions. And I see several hands raised. And then let's try to let everybody ask a question once, and then we can come back for a second round if there is time. So I think Liz or Victor, do you have a queue of who is up next?
Yeah, I was just tracking that. So Debbie Miller, I think you're up next. And then I just wanted to note that Gretchen and then Steve are following that, just so we see you.
I'm trying to figure out how to take my video this time.
Okay, we can hear you.
Gotcha.
Okay, there you go. Video is working now.
Yes. So I want to say that I'm very excited about the park. I go there all the time with my dog,
Right.
and I think our neighborhood, I'm retired, but our neighborhood's full of kids who play in the street, and I worry about that. They have a lot of fun. I'd like to see an area that's open, like grassy for them, because they like to throw footballs and they like to play baseball. And I know you guys didn't mention that area. And just the typical playground equipment. I really think a half-court basketball or a three-point basketball would be well used by the kids in the neighborhood. I'm very concerned about the west side of the park because I go there a lot and it's like walking on a sponge. The whole park is like this time of the year, even at the top part where you wouldn't think it'd be wet, it's like walking on a sponge. And I just wonder if the development that you're talking about with the wetlands would take care of that. Would it concentrate it into one area, or would it still be really wet?
Thank you, Debbie. Those are all great suggestions, great feedback. We have contemplated essentially an open play area, open lawn area on the site. The site is slopes. There's not much flat land on the site. And I think we didn't show like a soccer field or a football field because it's not big enough for one. And then we'd have a sloping field, so it wouldn't be a traditional one. But we do like the idea of having a lawn grass area for kids to play, toss a frisbee around, toss the football around. I think that's a great idea. I think there's an opportunity for half court or 3-point basketball. I appreciate hearing that. And then you are right about the west side being wet and kind of spongy, and that is because of the wetland. And we expect that the wetland will be regulated as a natural feature, and that will limit, for good reason, our ability to develop on that side. But there are other areas outside of the wetland that can be improved, and we think there is perhaps a little more opportunity on the east side of the swale where it's a little flatter, where the picnic table is there now, where there's opportunity to concentrate more of those amenities on drier land. It is a big site. We have a lot of natural features we need to work around, but we feel good about accommodating that program and also trying to incorporate some of the natural features and natural play that has been talked about earlier. So again, thank you all very good feedback.
I think
Hey,
Gretchen is
I'm
next.
Gigi Merrill. I got the formal name on there. Bill
Okay.
and I live on Tayside, directly across from the park, right where the Doug Firs are. And
Okay.
we've also been here since 2008. And we're excited about the park. We love it now. I'm in it 2 to 3 times a day. It's a wonderful, natural, wild gem right in the middle of a neighborhood. And so that kind of leads into my specific question, which is there's a lot of wildlife over there. And we see it on a regular basis. There are birds in the spring that nest in the ground. There's gray squirrels and red squirrels. There are owls. There are deer that sleep up there. So there are mourning doves. There's all kinds of and bats and you name it. We got it. How do we, I mean, I would expect, and I guess that's the question, is if there are some specific wildlife type of regulations or protections for our wildlife and what you will be doing to ensure the protection of that, because I loved the signage and the natural areas for the kids. I've seen kids up there, you know, parents taking their kids doing little nature hunts and stuff. And I love that for the family. So, and I also love the critters. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gretchen. Thank you for providing that perspective. And yeah, we agree that it's a great site as it is now. And I'm hearing something common when we get into these processes, and that's like don't affect the current features that we like the most about the site, and we don't want to do that. We want to just make it better and make it better for all ages and all users. But we can work within those constraints to tailor the neighborhood park to really embrace the things that are unique about the site. And you talked about wildlife and natural resources, and one of the things that we'll do as part of this process is go through some research to determine if there are any sightings of rare, threatened, and endangered species. And if there are, then we have to take very specific measures to protect their habitat and protect those species if they exist. Now, that's not saying the other species aren't important. Birds, bats, everything else we're very concerned about. And that's where we can start to tie in things like creek restoration and leaving habitat trees, leaving as many trees as we can on site, and then also creating some more vegetation or habitat. I mean, the park is essentially a large portion of the park is mowed right now, and we will need to maintain some of that for traditional park space, but not all of it needs to be maintained to that extent. And the areas that aren't mown can then become habitat areas. So we think, yeah, there's good opportunity to provide habitat and habitat potential, essentially provide better habitat for wildlife and better habitat for people, if you want to allow me to put it in that context. Liz, is there anything you wanted to add to that point, or Tony?
I'm good.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, let's keep going.
Yeah, I think Steve Phillips, you're next.
Thank you, Liz. Yes, my name's Steve Phillips, and my wife and I live on the corner of Rogue and Tayside, right across from the park. In fact, we're next door neighbors with Mike and Krissa. In fact, the whole side of our house fronts on the park, all the way from the dining room, kitchen, family room, and deck look out on the park. We moved here in January of 2017, and over the last 5 years, I've very much enjoyed kind of the rustic views and nature of the park. And to tell you the truth, we'd prefer doing nothing to the park other than to maintain it more frequently than in the past. However, that said, we understand that there's a need for a better place for kids in the neighborhood to play. And there are certainly things that could be done to the park and still keep its rustic nature. We certainly hope that most of the trees currently in the park stay, although as mentioned before, some thinning might be appropriate in the main grove, and then taking out some dead and leaning trees and cleaning that up. Our main concern, however, is that we do not go overboard on improvements to the park. As mentioned before, Bailey Ridge Park is classified as a neighborhood park, which serves a half-mile service area, basically Illahee and Bailey Ridge. We don't want to add features to the park that adds a magnet for people outside our neighborhood to come in, increasing traffic and parking on Tayside and Rogue, and possibly bringing in individual groups that we don't want in our neighborhood. Our hope is that whatever improvements are made, that they are appropriate for just our neighborhood and keep the rustic nature of the park, while at the same time adding those features that will improve the looks of the park, provide a picnic area, walking paths, I think was mentioned, maybe a small playground, but not overdo it. And we look forward to working with our neighbors in the city on the improvements to the park and its final design. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I don't really have a response to that, because I think that we share common interests and common objectives, and you have articulated those objectives very well. Respect the neighborhood, respect the rustic nature of the park, features that are compatible with the natural features of the park and compatible with the neighborhood. This is not intended to be a destination or to draw in from the outside. It's intended to respond to the neighborhood and be a part of the neighborhood. And we like it the way it is. We're not sure if it really needs to be improved. That's very common that we experience in these processes, and that is why we go through these processes, because we've shown you some options for facilities that we think would work and we think would be compatible, and that we think we can arrange in a manner that meets the objectives of keeping what is great and also improving it for children and families and other people. And that's what we're going to do. And then we're going to come back and show you how that looks in our next meeting with a few options, and you'll tell us what you like and you don't like. But I think we're very much on the same page, and you've articulated our challenge very well.
Thank you very much. And I'll look forward to seeing those plans in the future. That's great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Joshua, you are next in line.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm so excited to have received the email about this park that we're looking to develop here on in our neighborhood. We live on Tayside, and we have a young daughter, and we've felt like there's been something missing from this neighborhood for a long time. I think of a neighborhood of this nice and with as much property tax as we pay to live in this neighborhood, that we could actually have a real park. Because right now there's, I agree, there's not a park there. It's a picnic table in a field. But so very excited. However, I do want to emphasize that I agree with Steve. If you've ever been to this neighborhood on, say, Halloween, I know this is one time a year, but we do draw a crowd of people from surrounding areas to this neighborhood. And what was mentioned by Steve about, if we put in a skateboarding park area or a half court, full court, something of that nature, I do believe that is a genuine concern, because then it will draw a crowd, and we just frankly don't have any parking to really support that. And this neighborhood is not like other neighborhoods. It doesn't connect to an elementary school, or, I think Candelaria was brought up. This is nothing like that. This is a very unique neighborhood, and people live here for a reason, right? They do like the seclusion, and we certainly want to maintain that as best we can. So, again, people are aware of this neighborhood, and they do come in here, and there are times of the year where we get an influx of outsiders, and it is great. We're fine. But again, constantly or every weekend, that might be a bit much, and we certainly don't want cars piling up on the crossroads within the neighborhood. But very excited about the park and the development. Again, just being mindful of the type of amenities and what it's going to draw. If we could, that's huge. And I think that would be a somewhat of a common theme with many, as much as I want some of these things. I mean, believe me, I'd love to have some of those amenities, but I do want to be mindful of those in this neighborhood, especially those we've been here 7 years and others have been here much longer. Number two, one concern is members of this community had mentioned that this discussion has come up in the past and there were funds raised for a park and it never came to fruition and nothing happened. And people were a little skeptical of this new proposal, worrying that this isn't going to happen and that they're not interested in paying any additional HOA fees or any kind of increase, anything towards this if it won't actually come to fruition. Maybe you can, that would be one question if we could shed some light on or answer.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for those comments, Joshua. I'll address the features part, if that's okay, Tony, and then I'll come back and ask you to talk about the funding sources and whether or not there was any previous funding allocated. But again, great comments. I think we're in agreement. This is a neighborhood park. Speaking from my own personal experience, I have 2 young children. I do take them to parks outside of our neighborhood occasionally, but most of the time I am taking them to our more like regional and community parks because they want the biggest, best playground that they can go to. So we don't see this as like an appropriate allocation for a skate park. Possibly like an optional feature was the 3-point basketball or court. That's something that we'll consider. I'm not sure if it ends up in the final concept. And then I think you hit on one of the more unifying elements of neighborhood parks, and that is a children's playground, some place to take your kids, even if it's a small one. And so we do see like a children's playground, nature playground with some seating and maybe a shelter being as the sort of the integral core of this park. But again, the intent, I'm sure it will draw from outside and continue to draw people to your neighborhood, but that is not the overall intent to make it a destination beyond this neighborhood. Tony, I don't have the perspective you do on any past funding, and we'll ask you to respond to the last part of the question, if that's okay.
Sure. And Joshua, this is also in the chat, correct? The same question.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
just posted in there.
Yeah.
Again, we just
No,
had a
that's
few
fine.
members who weren't excited because in their mind, they were in a little, not disbelief, but they're kind of like, yeah, we've been through this before. So I'm only been here 7 years. So I'd love to know if there was in fact prior discussions about a park and what happened if there were, if it never was one.
Well, I know several years ago, some of the neighbors got together and put soft trails through, and they actually did a little bit of work inside where the Doug Fir forest is. That was quite a while ago. There have been a lot of requests for a park master plan, and it has, I will admit, it's taken us a while to get to this point. But as far as fundraising for development, I am not aware of that. I have not heard of that. That's the first I've heard. How we typically, what our process is. So we go through our master planning process, what we're doing now. And then when it goes through that full public process and is approved by city council, then we have an actual plan that we can work with. And at that point in time, we have the city, if you're aware, we have our capital improvement plan. And that's for projects greater than $50,000. So at that point, we would start looking at where we can apply money within the capital improvement plan is a 5-year window. So we apply funding to typically what we would do next would be design. Okay, and then you look at, getting a bid and going through construction. So we apply money in certain years, and we do this through, it's a scoring process because you're competing with a multitude of other projects all around the city, whether they're parks or utilities or whatever they may be, but also other park facilities as well. So it is competitive. I will tell you that. I know you don't want to hear that. but it is. And so we start slowly, and usually what we do now, because it's so expensive to develop, is we develop in phases. And that's what we typically plan for in the CIP. I can't tell you when that will happen, but once the master plan is in place, then we will start applying money to the CIP. And what happens from the CIP, when it reaches that particular year in the CIP, then it moves forward into the budget, and then we can start that process.
Do you have a current time frame that you've put as a target in a world that obviously isn't perfect? We have inflation right now on materials and costs of and labor. So do you have a time frame? Have you estimated the cost based on, should we wait a year when inflation reduces and we might be able to afford or to complete it, whether it's phase 1, 2, whichever amount of phases you have in place?
I would say it's probably, the design phase is probably at a minimum 3 to 4 years out.
Okay.
It's going to be a little bit for that, and costs of construction for a phased project it's quite high. I mean, you're looking in the upwards, 800, 900,000 for just a phase portion. But you just keep, letting us know of your interest and your desire, right? And then that, that helps get that park, moved up, right? So go to your neighborhood association and keep talking about it. And that's how I encourage people in this process, to just keep speaking out and letting us know.
Nice, thank you. I think COVID ready, potentially you're next.
Hi, thank you very much for all this opportunity to participate in this planning process. First and forward, I would totally agree with what a few of our neighbors, most importantly, Steve has said about the park. We live right on Tayside, 3774. And one of the reasons we bought this house was there's always going to be like no house in front of us, a park or a forest. And we really like that feature. We have a 2-year-old daughter, and hopefully we get funding and everything by the time she's ready to play in the park. However, we definitely want to preserve as much as wildlife and as much as the vegetation we can preserve in this, but would definitely love to see some of the play structures or some of the places where the kids can definitely have fun. At this point, we see a lot of neighborhood kids playing on the roads because they don't have really a space to like play hockey or play basketball or whatever interest they have, or even learn how to bike. So I don't know, like if the area on the other side of the swale, which has like pretty minimal vegetation, would be a better choice for developing something like this while we keep the forest and the wildlife preserved on the pine area. Maybe just a little thinning with some picnic tables and running tracks and things like that. Versus some other options, some of the thoughts we always had is like maybe some fruit trees or a fruit orchard for the neighborhood kids to have fun with, or maybe close to the swale, which can prevent the erosion as well as help like develop that skills of enjoying in the nature, fruit picking, or just like enjoying that scenery. The shelter, we would really be like, yes, it would be good to have a picnic in the shelter, but looking at how things have gone in the city of Salem in the last 2 years, there are more chances it would become a homeless shelter rather than a neighborhood picnic shelter. So we really would not like to see this secluded neighborhood develop into something like that. So far, it has been a pretty safe and like calm neighborhood. And if something like that happens, it might not be a welcoming feature of the neighborhood.
I would thank you very much for those comments. I agree with what you're saying, except with regard to the shelter, we found that if you put, the positive uses that draw families in, to use the park actually helps keep the number of the negative uses down. Granted, it's been a tough couple of years, I agree, but I would encourage you to look at the positive uses for your residents, and move forward with those.
Yeah, thank you, Kaveh. I think I agree with almost all of your comments as well, and like the suggestions to look to the west side as an opportunity for development. I think there is some potential there, west side of the swale, and then potentially introducing something we call edible plantings or edible landscaping in our design. I think there are some fruit trees already on the site that we observed near the swale, so that may be potential. Obviously, there are maintenance concerns when we're introducing fruit trees and they're dropping things, so we have to figure out how to work through those. But again, yeah, good perspectives, and thank you for your comments.
Thanks, COVID.
Thank you, everybody.
Oh yeah, thank you. Tom, you're next. Tom Hendry.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, hi, I'm Tom Henry. I live across the west side of the park with my wife, Elizabeth, and been very interested in how this park potentially might be developed in the future. I actually was kind of grassroots, started to talk with Debbie Miller and Tom Glass a couple of years ago, and began to realize that we've got 150 homes in our neighborhood or so. I think I might not be right, but a lot of homes and that many perspectives on what could happen with this park. And so our deck looks right out onto the west side of the park. And when I start thinking about having a basketball court 100 feet from my house in a very quiet neighborhood, very selfishly, I'm like, oh, well, that's not something I want. But I realize there's people that might want a basketball court in the park. But so there's a lot of questions that come up. That's just one example. I've heard people talk about other parks that have been developed with basketball courts. Brian Johnston Park out south of Kubler is one of the ones that's come up. Those seem to be much further away from like existing homes. So one question I have is, what's the proximity of building infrastructure that invades the privacy of people that are like right next to the park? That's one thing. But also, I share a lot of the same concerns that many people have just brought up, so I'm not going to regurgitate all those along the park. And even amongst us that I live next to Mike and Chrissa, and we're all kind of in the same neighborhood. We got concerns about the water flow and the cracks in the street, and what's the city doing to make sure our infrastructure is in place. All those things come into play, but I guess I would just leave this question, because I know there's so many different opinions about and so many different interests involved with people, and legitimate of what they'd like to see out of this park. We'd like to see it remain kind of a nature park without real, loud and infrastructure that would create a lot of noise and that type of thing. But my question finally is that how does the decision-making process work? Who decides? We've got 3 meetings and we've got limited amount of input. I'll certainly go and answer the survey. But when we get to the end of the day, someone that has decision-making power is going to say, well, this is the direction we're going. How do we get involved with that process of as we hone it down to what the final decisions are, having a voice in that?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Tom. And I'll address the last part of that question first. And to start, there's no really one source or one entity that is going to make a decision out of this process. ultimately this is a City of Salem project, and City of Salem Parks and Rec is providing the funding, but they have funded this process and put their trust in this process and our consultant team. So at the end of this, it's our job to make a recommendation on a preferred design or preferred alternative that takes into account all of the input that we have gathered through this process. And the inputs are on the ground site analysis and opportunities and constraints, our observations, all of the research we've done and design work we've done on comparable facilities, knowing what works in similar neighborhoods and similar communities all around Oregon. And then another input is community involvement, and that is happening right now, or I should say neighborhood involvement is happening right now. There will be some broader community involvement that happens as part of the survey. We'll be running a survey with every workshop. Those will be additional input points, and then all the workshops and more attendees and different attendees will also provide input. So that creates a lot of data and allows us, gives us a framework in order to work through the process. And so it's all of us making this decision together, but at the end, we need to recommend to the city what we think is the best fit for this particular site. And what I'm hearing is a lot from you all tonight is what you think would be the best fit for this site, and that's what we'll take away from this meeting. Liz, is there anything you want to add to the process, or Tony?
I would like to add that we do believe in this process. It is a public process.
Yeah.
And we do rely on the surveys and what you tell us tonight. And we take that information. The park does serve a half-mile service area. So anyone within that area who received a postcard, they see the sign, they're on the email list, they take the survey. And we go by what people say. We want your park to be how you envision it and how the neighborhood envisions it. And that truly, when we come back with the design options, we're going to ask you, what's your preferred option? And by the way, what do you like in these other options that you'd kind of like to have in this option? So we still gather more information because we want to then come back at the third meeting with that preferred option that meets the needs of, really the majority of people. But we want as many people in your neighborhood to be able to provide their thoughts and their vision for the park.
Well, thank you. Can I add one other thing? It just I threw out a word salad at you there with a lot of different things in it, but the proximity of being close to the park. We have a lot of homes that are adjacent. I said 100 feet. I think we're 50 feet across the street from the park. Does that come into play in the contemplation of a design when talking about basketball courts or skate parks or something that could, those are different things to me than building an exercise station or, trees or whatever. It's just a completely different thing. And we have a lot of homes that it's a tight neighborhood where most of our homes are like within 15 to 20 feet of each other. And then the park happens to be, another 50 feet away. So that, I think, if there is a contemplation of that aspect of it, I would like it to be considered. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me about your comments. I was going to come back to that. The answer is yes, we do take proximity into consideration when we're siting facilities. Oftentimes we'll work on a site where there are homes right up to the park boundary on three sides, and that is to some extent the case with this park, but the homes are a little further away on the north and west sides. And then we do have a Tayside Street provides that right away provides somewhat of a buffer between the park and the homes that are on the other side of the street. But for things that generate noise or generate impacts, we will take into account what those impacts are when we're siting those facilities. However, I will say one of the trade-offs is that we also need to balance the needs of safety and maintenance. For example, we don't want to put a facility so far into the site that it can't be seen by public safety as they're driving on the street, or can't be easily accessed. So there's a balancing of needs we need to do through these processes to make sure that we are trying to minimize impacts to neighbors, but we are designing a park that is safe and efficient.
Can I add one last comment? Speaking of safety, across from where we live, Mike and Carissa live, and some others, the ground is so soft, we probably lost half the trees. And these are large pine trees. And since in the 6 years we've lived here, I bet you we've lost 50 trees out of the 100 and something that are there. So there's a safety aspect to the soil and the trees, et cetera, that are serious for anyone that's in that area. And I'll sign off. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up. I think we're aware of that, and that the pines are essentially not, some of them are not healthy, drowning just in way wetter environments than they are accustomed to. And I think we're aware of the removal, and that is one of the design considerations that we'll need to work through and figure out what is really appropriate in that area, and that may result in the need to remove more pines, which gives us some opportunity to again reuse that material on site. But yeah, thank you for again highlighting that concern.
I would agree with Colin. Those trees are, they really are in the wrong place. And many of them probably will have to come out. Additionally, we'll be doing a full assessment, soil assessments. We have the hydrology study going forward. So all of these things, cultural resources, survey, all these things will have to be done and be considered as well before we move forward. Also, just wanted to say lastly, with regard to your input, is as the survey results come in and we have those finalized, we'll have those posted on the website as well, so you can review all that information.
Thanks, Tony. Let's see. I'm just gonna check the chat box for questions. I think Patricia answered one earlier. And then there's a question about outdoor ping pong being a possibility for noise.
That would be awesome.
It's a good suggestion. It's one of the more maybe not always common features we see in a neighborhood park, but we are aware of facilities that might have tables that also double as ping pong tables, and people bring their own paddles and balls. So yeah, that's something we can definitely consider, along with any other ideas like that you want to throw at us, or we have that question about that in the survey. Are there other facilities that we should be considering? So thank you for that suggestion.
Someone mentioned Brian Johnston. They have a picnic table that doubles as a chess table as well, and that's more of a site furnishing. So that's something we could just add in at any time.
Yes. I'm not seeing other questions in the chat box, but if we missed you somehow, please let me know, either by chatting me or raising your hand.
I don't know how to raise my hand, but
we'll take physical hand raising.
Yeah.
Works as well.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, I'm actually not on Tayside, I'm on Illahee Hill Road, but those trees provide quite a view from my backyard. So I just, I just another point about the trees are they're so precious, even just as a part of the backdrop of our neighborhood.
Yeah.
So really would love to see us preserve as many as we can. My other thought was, if there's, I see a little kids play structure that totally makes sense. I have 2 teen daughters and would love to see some activity. Granted, basketball's noisy, but some activity maybe that teens could do, so that they're doing something. They're not just sitting at a picnic table on their phones. Like maybe, I think someone suggested actually, it could be integrated into the environment more like, what was that, frisbee, where you have to hit a certain mark?
Yeah, disc golf. Yeah, disc golf holes. Yeah.
Something that's, it's not pavement, it's not, it's more natural, but there's still kind of a defined activity that kids could engage with. I would love to see that.
Yeah. Great suggestions, and we do endeavor to design parks for all ages. So we'll look at options for activities that would cater to your teenage daughters, even though they will probably end up at the picnic table on their phones, regardless of what we do.
Well, it's a good point. Actually, one more thought is, it actually is I also have dogs, or a dog now. I lost one of my dogs, but and it is kind of a nice, it's a place that you could gather with other neighborhood folks to chit chat in a much more casual way than inviting them into your house or inviting them into your yard. So would love to see something that's for adults too, who are just taking a walk, but maybe it's kind of a focal point or something that could be a place that people stop and rest and chat and maybe get to know each other that way. And then of course, I would love to see a dog friendly stuff. The dog thing that's there is just such a blessing. So whoever was behind getting that in place, just the trash can is so helpful. It's unbelievably helpful. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, thank you for those additional comments. I'm hearing dog friendly features, and then like the idea of resting places or small gathering places along the trail that people can meet and talk, and also take advantage of views. I think there's opportunities to do all those things on that edge of the park.
I agree. Thank you, Mary.
I'm seeing a question about any possibility of an outdoor stage where neighborhood kids can get together from COVID.
Yeah, a typical like amphitheater stage or performance stage is the type of facility that is more common in a community park or a regional park, and we wouldn't necessarily put in a neighborhood park. But we have done facilities that are like a small like reading circle, or an area where you could do like a book reading, or just a smaller, more intimate space designed for less people, designed for use by the neighborhood. So I think something like that is maybe appropriate for this type of facility. And that's something we can definitely look at and explore more if there's more interest from the neighborhood in that particular feature.
Nice. Yeah, thank you for that question. That's a good one. Let me just scan for hands. Is there anybody else that had a question?
Hi, is there an does the HOA have any sort of involvement in the plans and construction of the park for this neighborhood? I'm just curious what their involvement is, if they have any.
The Neighborhood Association, the primary one, the Bailey Ridge, Mr. Glass is the president. He is fully involved, and we would receive their information through these public meeting processes. And then also anyone is welcome to attend the Neighborhood Association meetings, the Parks and Recreation board meeting when it gets to that point, and submit comment either in person or in writing. And on that, I just want to say, as we near the end of the meeting now, to please check the chat. We have the link to the Bailey Ridge Park Master Plan webpage. That's the important one you want to hang on to. And then, of course, the link to the survey is in the chat as well as on the Master Plan webpage. And then the link to sign up to receive emails. And if you're already doing that, forward them on to your neighbor so they can sign up as well and participate. And also, I think if you go to the website, my contact information is there. Please contact me with any further questions. I'm happy to chat with you.
And let's see, I'm going to share my screen actually just real quick so that folks watching online can see the link visually just for a minute, maybe before we all leave. Everyone, really appreciate your time tonight and all of your input, and please come back and join us at the next meeting that is on March 17th. Correct me if I'm wrong, Liz, and please take the survey and provide your input and tell your neighbor to spread the word.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.